This is an action-packed fantasy anime filled with wild magic and an even crazier romance, and I seriously recommend you check it out. The story follows a man named Theo. He's had enough of the demons plaguing his homeland, the island of Sistina, and he's also sick of the cruel king who rules over it. So, Theo decides to leave his island and get stronger, setting off toward the main continent. After a lot of effort, he finally masters the power of chaos and manages to forge a crest. This crest grants him supernatural abilities and gives him the title of a noble. However, even with his new crest, Theo is still just a commoner with no land and no allies. So, he starts wandering across the continent, searching for enough strength to one day return and save his homeland from chaos. One day, his fate completely changes when he spots a girl being attacked by a group of soldiers. Being a brave and fair man, Theo can't stand injustice and rushes to help. He confronts the soldiers, flashing his crest in an attempt to intimidate them. But their leader doesn't back down, since Theo is just a nameless noble, and orders his men to attack. Theo uses his crest to enchant his sword and armor, and then charges straight at the soldier. Even though he's outnumbered, he fights with courage, managing to disarm and defeat his enemies one by one. Impressed by his bravery, the girl he saved introduces herself as Saluka, a highly skilled mage. Saluka explains that she didn't actually need help, since her bodyguard, Erwin, is a superhuman capable of wielding the power of chaos. Curious, she asks Theo how he managed to create his crest. He tells her he made it himself to protect his homeland. Saluka is amazed by his potential, but she can tell he doesn't know much about the world, so she decides to help him become stronger. She summons a two-headed demon hound and orders Theo to defeat it so he can absorb the chaos and empower his crest. Even though he's terrified, Theo faces the beast head-on. The fight is brutal, he's thrown around several times, but at the last moment, he finds an opening and strikes down the demon. With his hand still shaking, he absorbs the chaos released from the creature, and his crest evolves. Saluka examines it, and tells him he now has the power of a knight, which means he's qualified to form a contract with a mage. Without giving him a chance to refuse, Saluka swears loyalty to Theo as his mage. Though confused at first, Theo accepts the situation after all. Having a strong and beautiful sorceress by his side doesn't sound bad at all. Soon after, Saluka and Theo decide to confront a local noble who had sent soldiers after her. When they arrive at the noble's fortress, Saluka demands that he hand over his land and his crest to Theo. The noble laughs, thinking the three of them, since Erwin is with them, can't possibly pose a threat. But Saluka warns him that they're more than enough to take him down. The noble's court mage, recognizing Saluka as a genius of magic, quickly switches sides. He accuses the noble of violating the treaty that forbids attacks on mages without contracts. He declares that the noble will lose his title once the Mage Association hears of it and demands he surrender everything to Theo. Furious, the noble attacks Theo, but he's easily overpowered. Before he can strike again, Erwin appears behind him with a blade to his throat. Terrified, the noble gives in, handing over his crest and land to Theo, who absorbs the chaos under Saluka's guidance. Theo feels sorry for the defeated noble, but Saluka reminds him that he's now the rightful lord of this territory. Worried about how the other nobles will react, Theo accepts help from the court mage, who offers to assist with negotiations with neighboring lands. Saluka then explains the political situation of the continent. Basically, there are two major factions, the Alliance and the Union, who've been at war for ages. To end the bloodshed, their leaders agreed to marry their children and merge their crests, creating the powerful Emperor's crest that could supposedly end all chaos. But on the day of the wedding, chaos manifested right at the altar, giving birth to the Demon Lord. The Demon Lord slaughtered both faction leaders instantly, and the marriage was called off, reigniting the war between the two sides. Months later, Saluka, accompanied by Erwin, was on her way to meet a noble and form a contract when she encountered Theo. Now, she wants him to join the Union and begin his journey to conquer the continent. Although Theo doesn't fully understand Saluka's grand plan, he decides to trust her, especially since she assures him that everything will be fine as long as she's by his side. And so, realizing Theo doesn't have much of a ruler's mindset, Saluka takes charge of all the administrative duties herself. While he's supposed to focus only on getting stronger, Saluka learns that all the neighboring lords have their eyes on their territory. They believe it'll be easy to take down a new lord who just rose to power. So, Saluka decides to leave Erwin in charge of patrolling the borders while she summons a demon cat to deliver a message to her friend. Right after that, Theo visits her to ask what her real goal is in trying to help him. Saluka explains that she's sick of nobles who only care about power and let people suffer because of their greed. She says she's a big admirer of the legendary hero Leon, the one who restored peace to a world swallowed by chaos. Saluka believes Theo shares the same ideals and traits as that hero, and that's exactly why she chose to serve him. She also admits she just wants a real chance to prove her abilities without arrogant nobles getting in her way at every turn. A few days later, an ambitious noble marches toward Theo's castle with his army. but Saluka tells him not to worry, her friend has already arrived. Soon, they meet Ashella, who used to be Saluka's student at the Magic Academy. She failed her tests and now works as a mercenary with superhuman strength. Ashella is thrilled to see her old friend again, but when she realizes that Theo, the Lord Saluka chose to follow, doesn't have anything besides big dreams and ideals, she feels a bit sorry for her. Still, Ashella agrees to help them. When the battle begins, Saluka, Ashella, and Erwin take the front lines while Theo watches from the gates. They all rush forward to face the enemy troops. Saluka raises stone walls with her magic, trapping several soldiers, and then summons lightning to take down the rest. Suddenly, a mage from the enemy army tries to attack her from behind. Saluka senses it just in time and dodges the strike. She quickly recognizes him as one of her seniors from the academy. He had planned to capture her to end the fight quickly. But Saluka stands her ground and challenges him head-on. Both of them get exhausted fast, and Theo rushes in to help her, declaring that this battle is his to finish. He fights the mage and manages to wound him, but the enemy refuses to back down, throwing everything he's got into one last attack. Meanwhile, Ashella is tearing through enemies with insane strength, but the opposing army's leader tries to stall her to buy time. She sees through his plan and charges straight at him, instead of killing him right away. She ambushes him, and even kisses him before trying to choke him out. Panicking, the commander orders his men to attack Ashella, even if it means hitting him too. She blocks their attacks easily, and the leader ends up running away. Still, Ashella seems to have taken a liking to him and shouts for him to find her after the battle. Not far from there, Erwin is fighting mercenaries hired by the enemy. Using his assassin skills, he quickly takes most of them down, but the mercenary leader activates a special ability that turns his skin into steel. Erwin can't hurt him until he spots an opening and drives his blade right into the man's eyes, finishing him off. In the end, the enemy noble tries to face Theo directly, but is shocked when Theo shows up dragging the captured mage along. Realizing he's lost, the noble starts laughing like a madman before surrendering. He offers to become Theo's subordinate, acknowledging his strength. Theo accepts his surrender and absorbs his crest, giving him a subordinate's one in return. Soon after, a priestess from the church named Priscilla comes to visit Theo. Since relations between the church and mages are tense, Saluka refuses to open the door for her, but Theo, believing in the priest's good intentions, agrees to meet her. Priscilla introduces herself as a priestess who wants to support Theo's fight against chaos. Meanwhile, Theo's territory continues to expand thanks to the help of Lasik, the noble who swore loyalty to him. Saluka decides it's time for Theo to adopt a surname and suggests Cornero, in honor of a hero betrayed by the noble family that once ruled Theo's homeland. Theo agrees, and the name Cornero is adopted. Not long after, Saluka receives news of a chaos disaster in a nearby city. Theo and his allies rush to help, and when they arrive, they face a raging fire demon destroying everything in its path. Theo charges in recklessly, but soon realizes the demon is immune to physical attacks. Saluka casts a powerful water spell to defeat it, but the demon explodes before dying, causing massive destruction. Theo shields Saluka from the explosion, but ends up seriously wounded. The next day, Saluka thanks Theo for protecting her. He, in return, expresses his gratitude for everything she's done for him. Right after that, the king of the region declares war on Awful, fearing his growing power. Saluka suggests that he gather the independent lords to face the king together, but on the day of the battle, none of the lords answer the call, leaving only his closest allies to fight by his side. That night, the people whom Awful had recently saved from the fire demon show up to help. They declare that they're willing to fight and even die for their lord. Awful hesitates, unsure whether he should allow them to fight, but Saluka reminds him that they must respect their people's will. Awful accepts her words and uses his crest to create a holographic banner in the sky, inspiring everyone to fight alongside him. The banner falls upon his allies, marking them with Awful's crest symbol, meaning they now carry his protection and blessing. The next day, the war begins. Awful's army is still vastly outnumbered by the king's forces, but he leads the charge with courage. All of Awful's allies push themselves to the limit, managing to put pressure on the enemy army. Seeing that he's losing ground, the king orders his reserve troops to the front line. But suddenly, the independent lords appear to reinforce Awful's army. With these reinforcements, they manage to surround the king and attack from all sides, forcing him to flee. Saluka warns Awful about the king's retreat, and he orders his troops to finish off the remaining soldiers, thus securing victory. After the battle, Saluka heads to see Lady Marine, the leader of the alliance and the bride from the tragic wedding that started it all. Her goal is to discuss including Awful in the alliance. Marine, who has already heard about Awful's growing domain in the south, asks for some time to think, believing that having him as an ally could be advantageous. However, Mester the court mage and Saluka's adoptive father advises her against the idea. He claims that someone who changes sides so easily cannot be trusted. Lady Marine even says she might have to go to war against Othel and asks Mester if he's truly willing to let Saluka die in battle. He replies without hesitation that he has no problem with that. Later, he sends a message to Saluka saying that the request for alliance membership has been denied and that she should tell Othel to renounce his title and flee. Saluka becomes furious, but before leaving, she warns Mester and Marine that they will meet again on the battlefield. With no other options, Saluka turns to Count Viller Constant, a powerful noble from the Union and Marine's cousin. However, he refuses to receive her. The reason? He was the noble she was supposed to form a contract with in the first place, but Saluka chose to follow Othel instead. Viller sends a message back saying he sees no merit in allying with Othel. Without support, Saluka returns to inform Othel and the others that Marine and the dethroned king will soon attack them with an army 5 times larger than theirs. Even so, declares that even if they lose, they will make it a battle to remember. His allies stand ready to follow him to the very end. Soon, the Alliance army arrives at the castle. Isla's troops fail to inflict any serious damage on the enemy. The Alliance's knights use massive crossbows to bring down the castle walls. Isla engages the invaders in close combat, cutting down many while dodging arrows until she's struck by one in a vital spot. Saluka rushes to Isla's side, thinking she's about to die. But then Priscilla, the priestess, appears and uses her divine powers to save Isla's life. While Priscilla tends to her wounds, Saluka heads out to help the soldiers. Meanwhile, Theo is already taking control of the situation. When the Alliance Knights finally break through the main gate and invade the castle, Theo seals the secondary gates and orders a surprise attack from all sides. Surrounded, the Alliance Knights retreat, but Theo then receives word that one of his trusted allies has fallen. He learns that Lassic Theo has been defeated and is retreating, but this turns out to be part of Lassic's plan. He lured the former king and his troops into a narrow mountain path, where he begins eliminating them one by one. The king panics as he watches his men being slaughtered and tries to organize a retreat, but Erwin and the other mercenaries control the battlefield, cutting off his escape. With no way out, the king challenges Lassic to a duel. They engage in an epic sword fight at first. The king gains the upper hand, but Lassic counters fiercely, shattering one of the king's blades. With a final strike, Lassic emerges victorious, killing the former king. Lassic returns to the castle with the captured soldiers and is praised by Theo, who places him in command of the newly captured troops. But Theo admits that even though they've managed to win a few battles, there's no way to win the current war. So his new strategy is to negotiate with the Alliance and convince them to withdraw. Saluka then lays out the plan for everyone. The only way to persuade the Alliance is for Theo to give up his title and leave the land behind. Lassic, the one who killed the former king, would become the new leader of the southern region. He doesn't like the idea of Theo having to abandon everything, but Theo says that with his reputation and Saluka by his side, he can always return one day. However, when he tries to negotiate peace, Mester Saluka's father rejects the offer, claiming the Alliance will only back down if they get Theo's head. Saluka goes back to the castle and tells everyone about the conditions they've imposed. Theo's allies refuse to allow his sacrifice, swearing to fight together until the very end. Meanwhile, Lady Marine and her knights are informed that Theo offered terms for a peaceful surrender, but they turned them down. The knights believe it was the right call, since they want to defeat Theo and his army to restore their reputation. But Lady Marine worries that Count Viller might attack them from the rear if they send too many troops to the front lines. The knights, however, are confident that he won't after all. He refused to help Saluka earlier. Lady Marine then tells her knights to do whatever they want, and the next day, most of her forces attack Theo's castle, while she stays behind with just 100 guards. That was exactly the moment Count Viller had been waiting for. He and his troops strike Lady Marine's camp while it's barely protected. The Alliance knights immediately retreat to protect their lady, and Saluka, overjoyed that they're safe, ends up throwing herself into Theo's arms. Everyone now gets to savor the taste of victory. Later, they find out that Isla survived thanks to Priscilla's healing magic. Not long after, Theo gathers everyone to announce that the Alliance Knights have finally withdrawn after suffering heavy losses, and that they can finally relax for a while. One of his allies tells him they should thank Count Viller for that, but also warns that he's not truly their ally, and they might have to face him next. Speak of the devil, Count Viller himself walks into the meeting with his court maid. He greets Theo, who thanks him for his help, and Viller casually says not to worry about it, since he'd wanted revenge against Lady Marine for a long time anyway. Saluka apologizes for breaking their contract in the past, but he tells her to come back to his side now and promises to forget everything that happened before. Viller tells Theo to become the king of the south and offers to ally with him. Everyone is happy for Theo, but he refuses the offer because accepting it would mean losing Saluka. Instead, he offers to give up his title and crest completely and become Villar's knight, just so he can still have his girl by his side. Villar calls him a fool, but his court mage advises him to accept the deal, saying it could be useful. So Villar agrees to take Theo as his knight and tells him and Saluka to move into his castle soon. After he leaves, Theo hands his lands and troops over to Lassic, who swears loyalty and promises to help him whenever needed. Priscilla also wants to follow Theo, but he tells her to ask Count Villar first since he's the one in charge now. As everyone talks about their future, Saluka slowly realizes she's falling in love with Theo. Soon after, they arrive at Count Villar's castle. He assigns Theo as his personal guard, while Saluka goes to meet the mages working for him. After the introductions, a red-haired mage tells Saluka she'll be attending a banquet that night to welcome a prince from a foreign nation. Theo also joins the party to welcome Prince Mirza, who gets excited whenever he hears talk of ambition. He'd heard that Theo gave up his post and his lands for a single mage openly defying others, but when he learned that Lassic, who currently rules the southern region and is only holding the throne in Theo's absence, his opinion softened a bit. Later that night, Theo is cleaning the library while Saluka reads him the story of witches women who can summon spirits and demons. Saluka explains that witches are different from sorcerers. Those tied to the demon realm are called dark witches, while their opposites are known as white witches. Along with that, she tells Theo about superhumans who turn into immortal vampires and werewolves who endlessly regenerate, and how many of them once fought against a demon lord in the distant past. And when Theo hears about so many powerful people out there, he can't help but complain about how his homeland doesn't have anyone that strong. Saluka comforts him, saying that one day he'll definitely save his homeland. Not long after, they're summoned by Count Villar, who introduces them to Zelma, the elder of the White Witches. Count Villar orders Theo and Saluka to head into the Forest of Eternal Darkness and meet with the werewolves who suddenly abandoned their home. Zelma explains that the forest belongs to the vampires, and that something strange seems to be happening between them and the werewolves. They leave right away and soon encounter a group of hostile werewolves who refuse to talk about what happened. Suddenly, a talking bat appears and tells the werewolves that Theo is a guest of the Vampire King, demanding that they let him pass. The werewolves, furious at the Vampire King, demand that their queen and her daughters be returned to them, but the bat ignores them and flies off. Theo follows the bat and promises the werewolves that he'll do everything he can to help. They eventually arrive at the Vampire King's castle, where he reveals that a dark witch named Yana has taken the werewolf queen. He says he doesn't plan to interfere in their war and declares that he's no longer allied with either the werewolves or the nobles. The Vampire King goes on to announce that every noble who carries a crest is now his enemy, and that he intends to drown the world in the chaos he once fought against. He explains that if the nobles unite and recreate the Emperor's seal, they could completely banish chaos, but doing so would strip superhumans of their powers and turn him back into a normal human. That's something he refuses to allow. Saluka accuses him of being the one responsible for unleashing the Demon Lord during the wedding tragedy, but her words don't please him. Theo prepares to fight, yet the Vampire King isn't interested and simply walks away, though not before telling them where to find the werewolf queen. Theo and Saluka rush to the spot where the queen is fighting the dark witch Yana to protect her daughters. Yana plans to kill the queen and use her as a sacrifice to summon the Demon Lord, and she's just about to do it when Theo arrives in time to stop her. Enraged that the Vampire King has abandoned her to fight alone, Yana still believes they're no match for her and sends her gargoyles to attack. Saluka uses lightning magic, but it's not enough to hold the creatures back. Theo cuts down the one charging at him and immediately rushes to save Saluka. Meanwhile, Yana finishes preparing her ultimate spell and fires an incredibly powerful blast toward Theo. Saluka tries to block it with a magic barrier, but the spell tears right through, and Theo barely manages to protect himself. He channels the power of his crest to enchant his sword and deflects the attack, redirecting it straight into the ceiling. The werewolf queen seizes that moment to strike Yana after transforming, but her true goal is to free her captive daughters. Yana retaliates with thorned vines and summons more gargoyles to her side, but the queen tears through the monsters and engages her directly. When Yana tries to escape on her broom, the werewolf queen lands a deep slash across her legs. Even so, the witch still manages to flee through the hole in the ceiling, despite Saluka and the queen's daughters trying to stop her. The daughters rush to their mother's side, but she's fatally wounded and can't survive. Before dying, the queen asks Theo to protect her daughters and take them away safely. Keeping his promise, Theo returns with the twins and the queen's body to the werewolf clan. The werewolves hold a funeral for their fallen queen, whose body dissolves into pure chaos energy that spreads among the members of the clan. Their new leader thanks Theo for his help and swears loyalty to him. Afterward, Theo takes over the castle that once belonged to the Vampire King and talks with Saluka about how working together with the forest dwellers could strengthen their cause. However, after the battle against Yana, Theo realizes he still needs to become stronger. He vows to grow as both a warrior and a leader, and Saluka promises she'll grow alongside him. Now, joined by Irvin and the twin werewolf girls who've decided to serve as Theo's attendants, they prepare for whatever comes next. Meanwhile, Viller Constance receives an invitation to the annual gathering of nobles, and even though he doesn't want to go, he has no choice. His court mage, Margaret, tries to cheer him up, saying he'll surely be praised for his recent victory. However, Viller remains skeptical, fully aware that Mirza's ex-fiancée could easily stir up trouble. Trying to change the subject, he brings up Margaret's upcoming birthday. She's about to turn 25. Margaret gets upset by the comment and quietly leaves the room. Saluka and the other mages notice what's going on and eventually learn that Viller has a strange habit of parting ways with his court mages once they reach 25, believing it's time for them to go live their own lives. But Margaret doesn't want to leave him. She's in love with him, so Saluka decides to talk to Viller on her behalf. Viller explains that he truly believes it's what's best for Margaret, to have her freedom, build her own family, and live life however she wants. He then asks Saluka to organize a birthday celebration for her, while he begins preparing for the upcoming annual union meeting. Margaret ends up taking Saluka, Theo, and Lassic along with her. And during the birthday party, she looks genuinely happy for a while, dancing passionately with Viller, but becomes melancholic again when she remembers their separation is coming soon. Meanwhile, Theo and Saluka talk about how much they've already achieved together. Inspired by the warm mood of the party, Theo awkwardly asks Saluka to dance, even though he has no idea how, forcing her to teach him right there on the spot. Later, Mirza approaches Theo and mockingly calls him the Great Clown. Theo humbly replies that he takes it as a compliment if he can entertain the prince, then he's doing something right. Mirza doesn't take it well and challenges him to a mock duel. During the duel, Mirza attacks fiercely, while Theo focuses on defense, moving carefully and deliberately. Frustrated by Theo's defensive stance, Mirza calls him weak and claims that nobles like him are the reason the world has fallen into the age of chaos. Theo doesn't seem affected by the insult, which only angers Mirza even more. Before leaving, Mirza warns him that his lack of ambition could one day cost the lives of his allies. Afterward, Saluka confronts Theo, urging him to stay true to his convictions, promising she'll always stand by his side. Soon after, it's finally time to depart for the Union gathering. Viller decides to conquer the territories between his domain and the meeting's location as they travel. When they arrive in a neighboring kingdom, some nobles defect to Viller's side, while others remain loyal to their king. Lassic leads the army, and at Saluka's request, allows Theo to deal with one prominent independent noble on his own. Meanwhile, Mirza rides out alone to take down the king's right-hand man. Mirza storms the enemy noble's castle and demands he surrender his crests and his land. He gives everyone 3 days to evacuate, warning that anyone who stays will be executed. The noble laughs and orders his men to attack, but Mirza effortlessly disarms and kills him before he can even beg for mercy. He then absorbs their energy into his crest, spares one survivor, and orders him to hand the territory over to Lassic in silence. Back at camp, Mirza reflects on how Theo might handle the noble he's been assigned to. Meanwhile, Theo has already entered the rival's territory, having spent a long time talking with Saluka about the best approach. Everyone in the nearby town has heard about Theo's victory over the Alliance Knights and follows him as he heads to meet the noble Lavin. Lavin tells Theo he has no intention of surrendering to the Union and asks him to leave immediately. But Theo calmly explains that even if he turns back now, Lassic's army will soon arrive and take the city by force. He urges Lavin to fight him outside the castle walls so that the townspeople won't get caught in the crossfire. Being a wise and capable ruler, Lavin agrees, knowing there's no real way to stop his land from falling into Union hands. The townspeople, refusing to let Lavin fight alone, promise to stand by his side and follow him wherever he goes. Theo is moved by their devotion and tells Lavin that he should value his people's lives above loyalty or alliances. After thinking about it, Lavin decides to switch sides and join the Union so that he can continue protecting his people. He also admits that he admires Theo, saying he's a man of great ideals, someone all nobles should aspire to be like. Lavin pledges his loyalty to Theo and vows to support him when the time comes for Theo to reclaim his title and his homeland. The city raises the Union banners alongside its own, and Saluka remarks that Theo surpassed her expectations by convincing Lavin to surrender so quickly. Meanwhile, on the main battlefield, Lassic defeats the country's king, and the good news reaches Viller. He celebrates their victory, noting that they suffered very few casualties thanks to Theo and Mirza, who both handled their crucial battles on their own. Not long after, they finally arrive at the annual Union assembly where Theo, surrounded by high nobles, can't help but feel completely out of place. The nobles are split into factions. Some hail Viller as a hero for his territorial victories, while others whisper that his actions have disrupted the fragile peace of the continent. At that moment, Alexis, the leader of the Union and the groom from that tragic wedding, makes his entrance. He has a commanding, majestic presence that instantly captures everyone's attention, especially the women's. Alex greets Count Viller and thanks Saluka for saving his life during the wedding disaster. Then he turns his attention to Theo, saying he's a big admirer of his achievements. Later on, Viller takes Theo to meet Rossini, the ruler of Theo's hometown, who coldly warns him not to return to the island if he values his life. That night, while Theo is resting in his room, Alex unexpectedly shows up wanting to talk privately. Theo is puzzled by the visit from the Union's leader, but Alex admits that he admires him deeply. He says he's heard the story of how Theo rose from the streets to become the ruler of the South, only to give everything up because of Saluka. He gets emotional, saying he loves Marine just as deeply and would give up everything for her too, but she's determined to follow her own path. Alex says he dreams of uniting all the nobles across the continent to forge the Emperor's crest, and together banish chaos from the world once and for all. Moved by his conviction, Theo promises to help him achieve that dream and also to help reunite him with Marine someday. Before leaving, Alex tells Theo to find happiness with Saluka, but just as he's about to step into his carriage, Erwin notices an attack incoming and quickly sounds the alarm. Saluka instantly casts a magic barrier to block the rain of arrows before the enemies rush forward. The werewolf sisters transform and swiftly tear through the attackers, while Theo and the guards engage in battle as well. During the fight, Theo realizes that the assassins weren't targeting Alex, they were after him. When Saluka is about to be stabbed, her shadow cat demon jumps in and saves her just in time. After the fight ends, Erwin reports that he was injured while taking down one of the assassins who was sniping from a distance. Alex departs soon after, still feeling guilty about the attempted assassination. But Theo knows he was the real target. Saluka remarks that with Alex now involved, Rossini's days are numbered. She's certain that at the very least, he'll be expelled from the Union, giving them the perfect chance to act. The next day, Theo reports the assassination attempt to Viller and also tells him that Alex still loves Marine. Viller is pleased to hear it and decides to share the story of how Alex and Marine fell in love. They met back in the academy, when Alex was simply admiring some stones on the road, and the moment he saw Marine, he fell head over heels. He sent her hundreds of love letters and even planted a garden full of roses just to get her attention. Until one day, she finally noticed him. To thank him, Marine went to a masquerade ball, where a man tried to approach her. When she rejected him, he turned violent and Alex was the one who stepped in to protect her, though he got knocked out with a single punch. Still, Marine was touched by his bravery and took him to her room afterward, where they discovered their families were bitter enemies. Even so, they kissed and decided they would marry one day, no matter what. Viller finishes the story, saying he fully supported their union back then. Soon after, during the nobles' conference, Rossini is officially exiled from the meeting. Then one of the nobles blames Viller for stirring conflict with Marine and hurting the chances of peace across the continent. Theo steps in and takes the blame himself, saying he was the one who started the fight, and that Viller only came to help. The nobles don't manage to argue with Viller for long, and the decision to go to war against the alliance is approved. After that, Alex addresses the assembly. He admits he's only their leader because it was his father's position, but he no longer feels fit to hold that role. He says it's time for a new leader to be chosen and nominates Viller, praising his military strength. But Viller refuses the position, saying he won't fight his cousin Marine to the death. Taking advantage of the situation, Marine's relative Mark steps forward and nominates himself for leadership. No one objects, and the first thing he does is halt all wars and reopen peace negotiations with the alliance. Most nobles rejoice at the decision, but not Alexis. He knows that Mark plans to marry Marine as part of the peace deal. When Marine receives the message, she flat out rejects the peace treaty and orders her court maid, Albert, to prepare for war. She's visibly troubled by what's coming, because she still loves Alexis, and she believes there's no way to save his love anymore. But after that, a nobleman arrives at Viller's castle, saying that Marine's army has entered the neighboring territory, and they might attack at any moment. Mirza and Saluka both tell him he shouldn't follow the Union's peace policy and should counterattack immediately, but Viller refuses to do that. He's not happy with Saluka's persistence and dismisses both her and Theo before sending the nobleman away. While Saluka and Theo are traveling back to his territory through the dark forest, Saluka is still upset because Viller ignored her advice, even though he knows there's no way to avoid the war. To cheer her up and lift her mood, Theo invites her for a walk through his territory. But all they find are the cold and judgmental stares of the people living in the forest. They keep traveling through the dark woods, fighting off monsters and exploring unknown areas. Soon, it starts raining, and they take shelter inside a hollow tree. where Theo shares a blanket with Saluka to keep them warm. They talk about how happy they are to have each other, and Theo eventually admits he's worried she might permanently become Villar's mage, but she assures him that she'll never leave his side. Theo hugs her tightly, telling her how important she is to him, and Saluka can't hold back anymore. She confesses her feelings for him. Theo admits that he loves her too, and right after that, they start kissing passionately. Meanwhile, the war between Marine and Villar's neighboring lord begins, and Mirza shows up on his own to help. He dodges the attacks of the enemy beasts and wipes out an entire squad all by himself. Marine is shocked to see someone of his skill, and later, during a meeting with her knights, she agrees to break the war treaties by using a man-made chaos poison to take the enemy fortress. Her knights are surprised by her decision, but she insists they can't afford to lose this war. She sends Albest to create the chaos poison at sea while ordering her servants to send a message to Mirza. Albest creates the chaos poison and releases it toward the enemy fortress with the wind. The poison engulfs the fortress, rendering all the soldiers unable to fight. Marine and her knights quickly invade, slaughtering every soldier and even their leader. Before setting the fortress on fire, Mirza watches the one-sided massacre from afar, finding it all rather amusing. Suddenly, Marine's servants approach him and invite him to meet her. Mirza accepts the invitation but tells them to bring Marine to him. He decides to abandon Villar because he lacks the ambition to unite the continent under one rule. Now, Mirza wants to support Marine instead. She soon arrives to meet him and asks for his support in her Continental Unification Alliance. Mirza questions her about her relationship with Alexis and reveals that he knows she's lying when she says she's already gotten over it. Then he says he'll join the alliance only under one condition, that she spends the night with him. Marine accepts the condition, saying it will only be for one night and that she'll never belong to him. Mirza doesn't mind at all, and Marine allows him to take control of her body in the name of ambition. Soon after that, Marine prepares to march toward Villar's territory. Albert informs her that Mirza killed his father, took over his kingdom, and officially allied himself with the Unification Alliance. Villar, on the other hand, begins his own preparations to face them, summoning all his allies to unite under his command. His mages spot Mirza's fleet of warships approaching, but Villar senses something off and orders them to ready their weapons while he heads down to the dock. At the docks, he meets Margaret, who informs him that Mirza has defected to Marine's side and even killed his own father because he was standing in their way. Villar is stunned and realizes that winning this battle won't be as easy as he thought. He commands his ships to attack Mirza's fleet, but Mirza quickly counterattacks, boarding Villar's ships and cutting down his soldiers with ease. The captain orders his men to break the steering wheel and spill oil all over the ship. After that, they abandon it, and the captain sets it ablaze to take Mirza down with him. But it's completely pointless. Mirza kills the captain after a fierce fight and escapes from the burning ship. Meanwhile, Villar's mages use a massive lens to burn down Mirza's ships one by one. As he retreats from the sea, Mirza decides to withdraw for now, since his forces have already taken too much damage today. Back at the palace, Villar realizes that if he can defeat Mirza, the Alliance's forces will lose half their strength, and he plans to personally join the battle soon. Margaret is determined to join him as well, claiming that Mirza had already wiped out his entire clan. Right after that, one of Villar's allies arrives with a massive warship and wreaks havoc on Mirza's fleet. Realizing it's impossible to win the battle at sea, Mirza orders his men to retreat and head for the coast immediately. Meanwhile, Marine's forces manage to defeat one of Villar's strongest allies. Soon after, Mirza and the other allied forces regroup, and Marine declares that the real battle is about to begin. At her side, the Viking princess leads a gigantic fleet of warships straight toward Villar's castle during the night, and he quickly realizes that he can't win this time. Marine decides to fight to the very end and orders her mages to contact every noble under her command, telling them all to surrender. Villar prepares for battle with Margaret's help, and he finally admits that he loves her too, saying that now they can die together. The gigantic warship faces Marine's fleet of 1,000 vessels, but despite their efforts, they can't overcome her army. In a desperate attempt to take down as many enemies as possible, one man detonates the massive ship, but the explosion causes only minor damage to the enemy fleet. Marine's forces attack Villar's castle from every direction, with Marine herself leading the assault from the front. They're about to break through the castle gates, and Villar and Margaret stand ready to face them alone. Margaret uses her ultimate spell, covering herself completely in flame. She charges through the enemy lines, while Villar slashes down every foe in his path. Soon, Margaret runs out of energy, But just as Villa rushes to help her, she pushes him to safety and uses every last bit of her remaining strength to self-destruct. She turns to ashes after the explosion, and with his heart shattered, Villa charges into the enemy ranks without caring about his own safety. Marine orders her knights to fire their crossbows at him, but he blocks the combined assault using his crest. She's shocked to see him withstand it and decides to speak with her cousin one last time. Villa welcomes her with open arms, and Marine embraces him, asking him to surrender. However, he tells her to follow the path she has chosen for herself. He also wishes that one day she'll be able to marry Alex and find true happiness. With that, he dies, and his crest shatters into pieces. His soldiers, enraged, launch a desperate suicide attack against the enemy, but it's all in vain. By morning, Marine has completely taken over the castle. She walks into the throne room, where one of Villar's mages tells her that even if she's conquered the castle, everyone there will remain loyal to Villar. Marine then hands Villar's crest and territory over to Mirza, who will now lead an army to conquer the entire continent. Soon, news of Villar's death spreads to his allies, and Theo's heart breaks upon hearing it. All of Villar's allies gather and form a separate faction called the Treaty, whose goal is to avenge his death and prevent the Alliance from taking control of the continent. Everyone believes that Lassik should be the next leader, but he replies that he still serves under Theo, and he appoints Theo as their leader instead. The nobles don't see Theo as a worthy leader and start arguing with Lassik about his decision. Theo steps forward and tells everyone that he'll prove his worth as their leader in the next battle, asking them all to accept him. The nobles agree to let Lassik remain leader until Theo can prove he's more capable. Meanwhile, Mirza is trying to bring the nobles who once served Villar under his command, but they refuse to submit and fight him fiercely. As he sits on his throne, one of Marine's mages arrives with a message, ordering him to reclaim the territories Villar had conquered. The mage warns Mirza to be careful of the strength of his enemies, but Mirza doesn't like being told to act cautiously. He soon leads his army into battle against his foes and completely overwhelms them. Villar's brother, who commands the army, decides to pull back, luring Mirza into an ambush where Lassik is waiting with his own forces. Both Lassik and Mirza are eager to face each other, and they charge ahead of their armies. They exchange powerful blows, and soon their troops clash in a full-scale battle. Lassik takes some hits and gets pressured early on, but he also manages to wound Mirza, who realizes that Lassik is the only man strong enough to challenge him. Feeling he's at a disadvantage for now, Mirza decides to retreat from the battlefield. On the other hand, Marine arrives in Theo's territory, and in a moment of reflection, she quietly regrets having refused his participation in the alliance before. She believes he doesn't have a strong army right now, but even so, she doesn't wish to fight against him or against Saluka, even though they're declared enemies. Marine decides to ask her mage to send a message to Theo, saying she wants to talk to him one last time before the battle begins. Theo soon receives the message and starts wondering what Marine could possibly want to discuss, considering that a fight between them now seems unavoidable. Saluka mentions that maybe Marine has some personal interest in Theo, and that their meeting might not be entirely about politics. Theo understands and agrees to meet with Marine, since he also has something he wants to say to her. Saluka then decides she wants to see her father one last time too, because despite all their problems, he's still her family. When she visits Marine's tent, Saluka hugs her father before they begin to talk. Marine greets Theo with a handshake and says she's heard a lot about him. Theo replies that he's also heard plenty of rumors about her and points out that she seems like a completely different person now. He tells her that he once met Alexis and that he believes Alexis still loves her deeply. Theo tries to convince her to think things through again, but Marine explains that Villar also tried to change her mind before he died. She says she and Alexis were both too naive, and that the only way to end the Age of Chaos is by uniting the continent through war. Marine declares she's ready to spill as much blood as it takes to make that happen, and warns Theo that she doesn't want to fight him, but she's going to reclaim that territory no matter what. Theo ends up reflecting on Marine's words, saying he's sure she still loves Alexis, and that he wants to bring the two of them back together. Saluka replies that such a thing would take a miracle, but Theo, full of determination, says he'll make that miracle happen himself. Surprised by his words, Saluka gets even more shocked when Theo suddenly kisses her in front of all their soldiers. Blushing like crazy, she complains that it's neither the time nor the place for that kind of thing. Theo explains that he kissed Saluka in front of everyone to inspire his troops to make them fight for their leader's love and cause. The soldiers cheer, and Saluka realizes the gesture was also a clever move to make Marine remember her love for Alexis. The plan works perfectly, but Marine, clearly frustrated, soon receives reports that one of Villar's allies has defeated the Viking forces, forcing them to retreat. With the situation turning around, Theo decides to head back to his homeland to regain control and strengthen his position. Saluka points out that to help Alex and Marine reunite, Theo needs a rank and authority equal to theirs. He agrees with the plan and informs Lassic. And even though the mage Lassic thinks the mission is dangerous, he still supports it, believing that defeating Rossini and taking back Sistina will prove Theo is worthy of leading the nobles. Theo, Saluka, and their closest allies arrive in Sistina and discover that Rossini allowed chaos to spread across the land to keep the people oppressed and scattered. Determined to change that, Theo decides to march straight toward Rossini's city, while Saluka works on a plan to announce their arrival to the whole region. Rossini sends his troops to confront them, which actually plays in Theo's favor, because it gives hope to the oppressed people, showing them that someone finally dares to stand up to him. Once in the city, Theo, Saluka, and Escala stop by a small restaurant, where they run into Iana, who Saluka immediately recognizes. Iana's boyfriend, Salvador, turns out to be Rossini's eldest son. Salvador confronts Theo and declares he'll crush his enemies, using his crest to force the people around him into blind loyalty. Theo notices that the people affected by the crest have lost their reason, so he decides to retreat rather than hurt innocent civilians. Later, the group gathers to plan their next step, traveling through nearby villages to rally the people against Rossini. However, the villagers, used to living under constant oppression, fear retaliation and refuse to help. Salvador tightens his control even further, burning down any village that shows the slightest support for Theo. When they arrive at a particularly hostile village, Theo realizes that Rossini's family rules entirely through fear and despair. Even so, he remains determined to free Sistina and restore dignity to its people. As Theo leads his companions away, they begin to wonder if there's truly no one left who will join their revolution. Saluka suggests visiting Theo's home village, saying that at least someone there might understand them. Even though the others hesitate, Theo decides to go anyway, wanting to show them the life he once had. At the edge of the village, Theo spots his childhood friend, Rebecca. She runs toward him but stops at a cautious distance. He asks her to gather everyone in the village because he wants to speak to them all. As Theo starts talking to the villagers about their past, Saluka learns from Rebecca that Theo's father had built a secret storage facility hidden somewhere in the village. That warehouse helped people escape the heavy taxes. One day, someone betrayed him, and Rossini's soldiers killed him to set an example. The villagers didn't resist, and Theo held a grudge against them for a long time, eventually leaving the village. However, now he says he has let go of that resentment. Theo asks the villagers if they want to live under Rossini's rule forever, urging them to rise up against him, but no one answers, so Theo decides to leave. However, Rebecca stops him and asks him to at least visit his father's grave. He agrees and tells Saluka and the others to wait for him. Rebecca keeps talking cheerfully about how Theo has risen in life and says he really can defeat Rossini. However, Theo tells her to stop acting. He knows she's terrible at it. He realizes Rebecca is working for Rossini and asks how they threatened her. She replies that she wasn't threatened, she betrayed Theo willingly in hopes of being taken to the city. Rebecca feels no guilt for betraying him, but Theo pities her, understanding that it's not easy to stand up to one's oppressors. He tries to convince her that if everyone unites against their oppressor, they can win. When she rejects his words, he asks her to at least warn the villagers to flee, because he's certain Rossini will punish them afterward. Theo goes alone to his father's grave, aware that enemies are waiting for him. Meanwhile, Rebecca rushes back to the village, where Saluka is trying to convince the villagers to join the revolution. Rebecca warns them that Theo already knew it was a trap, but walked into it anyway to protect them. She pleads with the villagers to help Theo, reminding them that Rossini will not spare them even if they hand the boy over. Meanwhile, Theo reaches his father's grave, where Salvador and his soldiers are waiting. They fire arrows at him, but Erwin appears to shield him. It turns out Saluka had ordered Erwin and the twin werewolves to follow Theo. However, Salvador doesn't see them as a real threat. Suddenly, the villagers arrive to support Theo. He thanks them, raises his banner, and blesses everyone with his powers. Salvador also uses his crest to empower his soldier, and the battle begins. The villagers take cover behind makeshift barricades and hurl stones at the enemy. Saluka and Ixchella work together, casting powerful magical combos that take down several foes. While Erwin fights Rossini's assassin, Theo faces Salvador directly and manages to break his sword. However, enemy soldiers arrive to aid Salvador, giving him a chance to flee. Theo becomes surrounded, completely trapped, but Rebecca appears unexpectedly and grabs Salvador to stop him, even as Theo begs her to let go. She refuses, and in response, Salvador stabs Rebecca with a hidden dagger. Enraged, Theo slaughters the surrounding soldiers and charges at Salvador, who tries to escape. Salvador ends up dead beside Theo's father's grave. With their leader dead, the enemy soldiers retreat. Theo runs to Rebecca's side, but she dies in his arms, leaving him devastated. The impact of the battle quickly spreads throughout Sistina, sparking several uprisings. Rossini and his sons gather to discuss the situation. They realize things will only get worse if they don't act fast. So Rossini orders his sons to gather 5,000 soldiers to crush the revolution immediately. However, he refuses to lose another son due to lack of preparation. Rossini's eldest son accepts the task of suppressing the rebellion and avenging Salvador. He leaves the room determined, while Rossini, still consumed by rage, vows to ruin Theo's life for killing his son. Meanwhile, the assassin who worked for Salvador remains in hiding, determined to avenge Erwin. Diana finds the assassin and learns of his mission. She comments that tracking Erwin alone will be difficult since the twin werewolves are always by his side. But Diana has a few ideas. She assures the assassin that she can lure the twins away, giving him a chance to face Erwin without interference. Diana is also eager to eliminate the werewolves and, after that, plans to destroy Theo and Saluka as well, whom she deeply despises. Meanwhile, the number of people under Theo's command grows rapidly, and Xcella is training new recruits to fight properly. Theo feels encouraged seeing so many people rising up against Rossini's rule and shares his dream of building a castle in his village one day so everyone can live in peace. Saluka reminds him that it's still too early to think about that. But she's interrupted when Erwin warns that Rossini's second son is marching toward them with a huge army. Theo quickly organizes his troops and leads his army out to meet the enemy. On the battlefield, Erwin and the twin werewolves spot their respective mortal foes. They tell Saluka they need to deal with them right away, and she wishes them to be careful before they head off. Erwin faces the assassin in a brutal fight. The enemy is just as skilled as he is and uses poison blades, which puts Erwin at a disadvantage. Still, Erwin manages to parry the strikes while coating his own blade with poison. The duel is intense like two shadowy ninjas until Erwin lands a decisive stab. The assassin loses his balance and Erwin delivers the final blow. However, Erwin is also slashed by a poison knife and collapses. Meanwhile, the twin werewolves fight Yana, who has summoned a powerful demon to fight them. The twins attack the demon but can't break through its magical barrier. The demon counters by surrounding them with a ring of hellish fire. With no other choice, the twins use a combined move. They transform into wolves, leap over the barrier, launch into the sky, and strike Yana directly. She dodges the first blow, but takes the second across her back, forcing her to fall back. When Yana flees, the demon disappears, and the twins rush to find Erwin. They find him unconscious. They realize he's been poisoned and fear for his life, but Priscilla arrives at that moment and vows she won't let him die there. Using the power of her crest, she heals Erwin and saves him. Back on the battlefield, Theo watches the leader of the enemy forces in this case, Rossini's second son, and rallies his soldiers, saying that if they defeat the leader, Rossini's power will start to crumble. He raises his banner and blesses his allies with his protection, while Rossini Jr. uses the cursed power of his crest to buff his troops, and the battle begins in earnest. Theo confronts Rossini Jr. directly and knocks his horse down with a strategic strike. Rossini Jr. charges him, but Theo holds firm on defense. In the duel, her hand wounds his enemy and brings him to the ground. Enemy soldiers rush to help, but Theo cuts them down with ease. Rossini Jr. rises and attacks again, but Theo disarms him and then kills him, ending the fight. Theo's soldiers cheer the victory, and he asks Saluka to make the surviving enemy troops surrender. At that moment, Diana plunges down from the sky aiming to kill Theo in a kamikaze strike. She launches her strongest attack, but Saluka reacts quickly and counters with her most powerful spell. Their attacks cancel each other out midair, and Diana falls. Captured. News of Rossini's son's death reaches Rossini, and he realizes he's already lost the battle. He's ready to surrender to Theo, but insists his remaining son, Josel, must be spared at all costs. Josel says he will negotiate with Theo and try to prove he can be useful to both him and the people of Sistina. Some time later, Theo finally arrives at the castle with his soldier, and Josel comes out to greet them. Josel says he will surrender if the lives of his retainers are spared. Othel agrees, but declares that Josel and his father will lose their lives as rulers, and all the family's accumulated wealth and their allies' holdings will be confiscated. Josel begs to be allowed to live, claiming he could help rule Sistina, but Theo refuses to spare him for that reason. In the end, Othel decides to keep Josel alive to avoid bloody reprisals from Rossini's loyalists. Josel accepts the terms and swears fealty to Theo, winning the people's and Saluka's approval. Later, Saluka interrogates Yana to understand her motives. She suspects Yana was the one who called forth the demon lord during the tragic wedding, though she also knows Yana couldn't have done it alone. Yana refuses to answer and instead attacks Saluka. Shortly after, a messenger from the Magic Academy arrives at Theo's castle, declaring that Yana was indeed the true culprit behind the wedding disaster. They want to execute her, but Saluka feels something's off since there hasn't been time for a full investigation. The envoy praises Theo for taking control of Sistina and proclaims the Academy recognizes him as the new lord. As a reward, Theo also receives generous benefits for capturing the Dark Witch. Following that, preparations for Iana's execution begin. She's tied to a stake and the guards set a fire around her. But she only laughs, shouting that everyone used and discarded her when she was no longer useful. She declares she won't die so easily, and she sacrifices her own life to summon the Demon Lord. Chaos starts to swirl around her, and soon the Demon Lord responsible for the Great Wedding tragedy appears. Iana laughs at everyone, saying they're all doomed, but to everyone's shock, the Demon Lord strikes her down. Everyone is stunned, and Saluka notices the envoy from the Academy smiling as he watches the witch die. Right after that, the Demon Lord vanishes, and the chaotic energy around him fades away. Meanwhile, back on the continent, Mirza receives news that Theo has officially been recognized as the Lord of Sistina. At first, Mirza doesn't seem interested, but the mage informing him explains that Theo has become extremely popular among the people, and that his success could fuel the rebellion of the independent nobles. The mage is interrupted by a soldier bursting in to report that several nobles have attacked one of Mirza's fortresses. Furious, Mirza learns that the fortress was destroyed by an army made mostly of commoner. The mage warns him that this isn't just another uprising anymore, it's a full-blown war, and says they need to end it quickly. Still puzzled about why the civilians are rebelling, Mirza agrees to the mage's strategy. First attack the villages of the White Witches, then go after the werewolves, and finally crush the independent nobles leading the rebellion. He follows the plan, burns down the witches' villages, drives the werewolves into hiding, and defeats the noble. Now overconfident, Mirza believes no one can stand against him, and ignores the mage's warnings that arrogance could easily turn the tide against them. While they talk, Theo is already returning to the continent. Saluka learns about the atrocities Mirza committed against the people and warns Theo that he'll be the hardest enemy to take down. Theo agrees, saying that defeating Mirza is crucial for their future. He gathers with Lassic and the other allies, who congratulate him for conquering Sistina. Lassic acknowledges Theo's growing importance and points out that there's still time for him to become their true leader. During a meeting with the members of the Alliance, Theo asks for a moment of silence for all the lives lost because of Mirza. After that, he takes responsibility for the casualties that occurred while he was in Sistina and volunteers to face Mirza in battle and defeat him. Theo admits he can't do it alone and asks the nobles to let him lead them this time. He seeks approval from Villar's younger brother, who grants him permission. With that, Lassic declares Theo the commander for the next battle. Meanwhile, Marine hosts a small tea gathering. Mirza praises her for her recent conquest, and soon the two argue about the right way to rule rebellious people. Marine says each of them should govern in their own way within their own territories. Then she explains the current status of her campaign, saying she's close to wiping out the Union entirely, but admits she's still worried about Theo's return. Everyone knows Theo intends to come for them, and they start planning how to deal with him when that happens. Marine warns them not to underestimate Theo and offers her help if needed. At that moment, a subordinate rushes in and reports that Theo has declared his intention to retake the Dark Forest first. Mirza is enraged upon hearing this and immediately sets out to confront him. Marine once again warns him not to go easy on his opponent. On the other side, Theo meets with the werewolves and witches to discuss their battle plan. He wants to fight Mirza in the dense forest because it gives them the home field advantage. Marine notes that the hardest part will come afterward when they'll need to seize the castle itself. She says they'll need a much larger army for that, and that Lassic is already working to gather more troops. Josel is also with them and reports a rebellion rising in the regions ruled by Mirza and the Viking princess. He's heard of a slave revolt there and suggests they try to form an alliance. Theo agrees and begins preparing for the coming battle. Meanwhile, Mirza is enraged that the forest region was taken from him and decides to invade it immediately. His mage begs him not to rush in, urging him to wait until Theo leaves the forest. Fighting him there would be a huge mistake. But Mirza, disgusted by what he sees as cowardice, silences the mage and orders his army to assemble. He vows to reclaim the forest and make Theo regret ever crossing him. Soon, war erupts in the forest. The werewolves take advantage of the thick mist to ambush enemy soldiers, taking them down one by one. The White Witches strike next, unleashing poisonous fog that wipes out many enemies at once. Theo's army also clashes head-on with the opposing forces, but when Mirza shows up, the captain orders his soldiers to fall back. He loses his eye, and then his life, trying to take Mirza head-on, but at least his men manage to retreat safely into the forest. Mirza decides not to chase them down and instead heads straight toward Theo's castle, but thick thorny vines rise from the ground, blocking his way and cutting him off from most of his army. Even so, he keeps moving forward, stubborn as ever, and soon reaches the castle with only a handful of his soldiers left. He challenges Theo to a duel, but Theo tells him to just accept his defeat and go home. Mirza curses at him, but eventually retreats, and Saluka warns that next time he'll probably return even stronger. And that's exactly what's about to happen. Mirza still hasn't recovered from the massive defeat he suffered. His sorcerer tells him Theo will soon leave the forest and attack, and Mirza instantly says he'll kill him the moment he shows up. The mage suggests sending their army south to fight Lassic for a while, saying that'll surely draw Theo out, then they can strike him. Mirza likes the idea and orders him to start preparing right away. Saluka receives word that Mirza's army is heading south to face Lassic, and she tells Theo it's clearly a trap. Saluka believes that, for now, they should stay the course and gather a new army of civilians to fight. However, Theo doesn't like the idea of asking common folk to risk their lives for him. Saluka calls him out, saying the people are more than willing to die for his cause, and that gives him the motivation he needs. Theo then declares they'll march straight for Mirza's castle and take it while he's gone. Saluka contacts her fellow mages, tells them about the plan, and asks them to buy time while they seize the castle. Villar's younger brother's mage comes up with a plan and tells Saluka to leave it all to him. Heading south, Mirza gets the news that Villar's younger brother has abandoned his own castle, even leaving his mage behind. He figures it's because the nobles still don't fully trust Theo as a reliable ally, and he wants to take that castle before dealing with Lassic. He orders his mage to capture it as fast as possible and leaves part of his army to guard it. But as he continues onward, Mirza realizes Theo tricked him. Theo has gathered a huge army to face him head-on. Mirza loses his temper and is desperate to crush him, but his mage warns him not to fight now since they're badly outnumbered. Mirza gets furious about having to retreat again, even pointing his dagger at his mage. But in the end, he listens and pulls back to his castle. There, he waits for reinforcements, but learns that Marini is coming to help with only 3,000 soldiers, and there's no news from the Vikings. Seeing the temporary fortress and the massive army in front of him, Mirza senses that this might be the time he finally tastes defeat, but he's not about to fall without a fight. Bad news keeps piling up, and now even Lassic's forces are arriving at the castle. Mirza realizes he can't wait for Marini to show up, so he charges out to fight the enemy himself. His sorcerer begs him not to, warning that facing such a huge army alone is basically suicide. But this time, Mirza refuses to listen. He says he can't let Marini get dragged into this war, because if she falls too, the Alliance's forces will be doomed. He thanks the mage for helping him through all his past battles, then admits that Theo is a true visionary, someone who understands that real power lies in the hands of the people. Still, Mirza can't accept that idea and declares he'll fight for his own ideals until the very end. His mage decides to follow him. Mirza marches out with his army, and Theo soon gets the signal that the battle is about to begin. Mirza ignores the temporary fortress standing in his way and goes straight for Theo's base. Half of Mirza's army passes through the fortress, but one of Theo's captains slams the gates shut, trapping the rest inside a brutal fight. Mirza rages but keeps pushing with his remaining men, breaking through the enemy lines. He's about to clash directly with Lassic's army, but suddenly changes direction at the last second, aiming straight for Theo. Lassic isn't pleased and decides to chase Mirza down. Meanwhile, Mirza's army closes in fast on Theo's camp. Theo orders the civilians to leave the battlefield. He doesn't want them to die in the chaos. He tells everyone to retreat because they can't possibly match Mirza's forces, but the civilians refuse. They're burning with anger, wanting revenge on the man who slaughtered so many of them, and they beg Theo to protect them and lead them into battle. He's deeply moved by their determination, and he raises his giant banner high, granting his soldiers his protection. Mirza tears through the barricade in his way, carving a path straight toward Theo. His men follow behind him, but they're forced to scatter as a rain of arrows comes flying down on them. Mirza keeps dodging arrow after arrow while searching for Theo, but Saluka forces him to stop by blasting him with a lightning strike. Right after that, Ixchella leaps at him with a powerful blow, and somehow Mirza manages to block it. Then the twin werewolves attack next, but Mirza pushes Ixchella back and takes both of them down in a single swing. Irving tries to sneak up and assassinate him, but Mirza spots the move, breaks his attack, and sends him rolling across the ground. While he's distracted, Saluka launches a massive fireball to finish him off, but Mirza somehow survives her attack. He counterattacks, but Theo rushes in at the last second to save his girl. Mirza challenges Theo to a one-on-one duel, and Theo accepts. Saluka and the others are horrified. She tells him he can't take such a risk. The future of the entire continent rests on his shoulders. She's terrified he might die. But when Theo answers that he can't back away from this fight, she at least begs him to win. Theo hugs her and tells her to trust him, then walks straight toward Mirza. Both men enchant their weapons using their crests, and the entire battlefield falls silent to watch their leaders clash. Mirza attacks first, while Theo sticks to his plan, block the hits and counter at the right moment. Mirza dodges Theo's counter and tries to land a fatal strike, but Theo blocks it with his shield. Mirza keeps swinging wildly, cutting Theo a few times, but Theo continues to block most of his blows. Mirza curses him out as they fight, but soon he's gasping for air. Theo tells him he's gotten weaker since their last battle, but he's already near his limit. Hearing that makes Mirza snap, and he charges recklessly, burning through what little stamina he has left. After a few more desperate strikes, he loses his balance. Theo points out that Mirza's army has already fallen apart. Still, Mirza refuses to die easily. He lunges at Theo again, but Theo disarms him and drives him down to his knees. Theo steps closer and tells him to hand over his crest, but Mirza chooses death instead, so Theo stabs him in the chest, ending it. Mirza's mage can't handle the loss of his master, so he takes his own life to follow him. After that, Mirza's crest shatters and turns into a swirling orb of chaotic energy. With his allies' approval, Theo absorbs it. His crest evolves. Theo declares that they've finally avenged Villar's death, and holds a moment of silence for their fallen leader. Saluka runs to him and throws her arms around him. Relieved that he survived, she begs him never to do something like that again, and Theo promises he won't. There's no one left he personally wants to defeat. As the dark clouds above them break apart, Theo joins his allies to celebrate their victory. Meanwhile, Marini gets the news that Mirza died heroically fighting Theo. She's furious and heartbroken over losing her strongest ally, demanding to know why he couldn't just wait for their reinforcements. Her mage explains that Mirza realized waiting was pointless. He didn't want Marini to risk her own life. She accepts her loss and decides to withdraw to her territory immediately before Theo and his forces attack. Theo and his allies arrive at Mirza's captured castle and pay their respects to Villar. After that, Lassik kneels before Theo and offers to become his subordinate once again, surrendering his crest to him. Theo asks the nobles if anyone objects, but they've all already accepted him as their leader. Even a queen steps forward, offering to serve under him too. Villar's younger brother also pledges loyalty to Theo, surprising everyone. Theo gladly accepts all of them, and Saluka officially declares him the leader of the pack. Everyone applauds as Theo takes the throne. He vows to carry on Villar's legacy and bring lasting peace to the continent. Theo then announces that they'll stay neutral and separate from the Union to reconcile with the Alliance. Lassik and the others argue that it's not a smart idea. It could create a power imbalance, leaving the Union weak while the Alliance grows stronger. But Theo responds that they'll still support the Union while working to end the conflict with the Alliance, to keep both sides in balance. He declares that their future now depends on the Union, and that they need to make sure everyone cooperates. Theo then says they can leave all those annoying matters for tomorrow, because today's the day to celebrate their victory. He throws the liveliest party anyone's seen in years, and everyone has a blast. When the party ends, it's already late at night, and Saluka heads to her room only to find Theo waiting for her. Theo says he wants to talk about something important and invites her over to his room. She serves him tea and congratulates him for becoming the leader of the treaty. She tells him that all the nobles have accepted him as their leader and that the people respect him more than ever. Suddenly, Theo gets hit with imposter syndrome, feeling unworthy of all the love and respect he's receiving. He still blames himself for the deaths of thousands of soldiers and civilians, and swears that such tragedies won't happen again. Theo says his ultimate goal remains the same: to return to his homeland and rule it peacefully. However, there's a small change in his plans now, because he also wants Saluka to stay with him. She replies that she's pledged eternal loyalty to him and will serve him for the rest of her life. Theo realizes that words alone aren't enough to convince her. He hugs her and says he wants her by his side, not as a hired assistant, but as his wife. Saluka gets emotional and starts to cry as she accepts his proposal. She says they should keep their relationship secret until everything is settled, then hugs him tightly, begging him not to die in his upcoming battles. Soon after, Theo and Saluka visit Priscilla, who tells them that the Pope has declared Theo to be the rightful owner of the Holy Grail. Saluka believes that Priscilla is actually the true owner of the Holy Grail, since its emblem matches her crest. Priscilla agrees, and Theo asks the two to explain what exactly the Holy Grail is. Saluka explains that the Church claims if all the crests in the world are united with the Holy Grail, they could summon a god capable of wiping out chaos once and for all, basically the same concept as the Emperor's crest. Saluka also believes that since Priscilla is the real owner of the Holy Grail, the Pope, who lacks that power, might target Kala next. She warns Theo that the Pope might also come after his crest. Theo says that if he can save the world by giving up his crest, he'd gladly do it. Later that day, they hear the news that Wheeler's best friend, one of the strongest nobles in the Union, has died in the war against Marine. Saluka receives information that the new leader of the Union, a man named Downson, betrayed him and sabotaged his army before switching sides to the Alliance. She explains that the traitor is trying to rally the nobles of the Alliance to his side, but hasn't managed to do it yet. Theo gets disturbed hearing this, fearing that the Union might be on the verge of collapse. Seleuca tells him she has an idea that could change things and says they should go talk to Alexis. Theo doubts they'll be welcomed after leaving the Union, but Seleuca trusts Alexis and believes he'll be willing to speak with them. They then take a ship and arrive at Alexis's territory. Theo spots enormous warships docked at the port, and Seleuca explains that those ships are so slow they're useless in battle. People even call them peace ships. While they admire the ships, Erwin shows up and says Alexis wants to meet them immediately. They go to a strange-looking hall, and Alexis thankfully turns out to be the same charming person as ever. He says he's impressed by Theo's recent accomplishments, but he's also disappointed that Theo and his allies separated from the Union. He pleads for their return, even offering Theo the position of Union leader. Theo refuses because he wants to act as a mediator between the Union and the Alliance, but Alexis insists that they'll never truly reconcile. Alexis says that if Theo hadn't been so stubborn about negotiating peace with the Alliance, they wouldn't have lost Vila and the other nobles. Theo comforts him, saying that if he'd chosen war instead, he would have lost Marine. Alexis sadly admits that Marine is still the most important person to him, and that's why he tried to achieve peace, but Marine wasn't like him, and she ended up going to war against him. Seleuca tells him that Marine just wants to form the Emperor's crest by conquering the continent. Alexis comments that they could actually form that crest if they just got married. Seleuca answers that there are people who don't want them to marry, and those same people were behind the Great Wedding Tragedy. Theo declares that he wants to undo that tragedy and restore the world to the time when the Alliance and the Union were about to become one. Alexis thinks that's impossible now, but Seleuca confronts him, saying they just need to find balance between the Union, the Alliance, and the treaty for that to happen. She tells Alexis that most of the nobles in the Union haven't actually experienced war yet, so their armies are still completely intact. Meanwhile, the Alliance forces under Marine's command have taken heavy losses. She urges him to stand up and turn the situation around, but Alexis is too much of a coward to do it. Theo tells him he has to do it for Marine's sake because she still loves him. He believes that even if Marine conquers the continent and forms the Emperor's crest, she'll never truly find happiness without the man she loves. Alexis can't believe Marine still loves him, but Theo assures him it's true. He tells Alexis to remember how he and Marine once promised to marry each other. Suddenly, Alexis finally acts like a real man. He grabs his sword and marches out. Everyone's shocked to see him with a weapon, and he tells his mage that he's going to strike down the traitor, Downson. The mage can hardly believe it, but she still orders the army to be assembled immediately. When word spreads among the soldiers that Alexis himself is taking action, they get fired up and can't wait to join the fight. Meanwhile, Downson is living it up after joining the Alliance, convinced no one can touch him now. He mocks the Union, saying it's full of fools and weaklings right before a soldier bursts into his room to report that Alexis is leading a massive army straight toward his castle. He nearly jumps out of his skin when he looks out the window and sees the army practically at his doorstep. And it's not just Alexis, every noble from the Union has united and come to deal with the traitor. Seeing such a huge army, the man practically soils himself and desperately calls Marine for help, but she makes an excuse, saying her forces are busy fighting the treaty and can't afford to come to his rescue. Instead, she tells him to prove his worth by defeating his enemies on his own if he wants to be accepted by the other Alliance members. That's when he realizes he's completely screwed and sends his mage to beg Alexis to take him back into the Union. But Alexis refuses to let the rat go free and declares that if Downson hands over his crest and his lands, he'll spare his life. Downson flies into a rage when he hears the message and decides to go to war against the Union forces. He rallies his army and the mercenaries working for him, promising huge rewards if they win. When Alexis sees Downson's troops marching toward him, he sighs, still wishing things could have ended without bloodshed, but unfortunately, that's not an option anymore. He raises his crest to protect his soldiers and sends them into battle. He orders the cavalry to surround the enemy and push them inward so the archers can rain arrows down on them. His strategy of encircling and crushing the enemy works perfectly. When Downson looks over the battlefield, he realizes just how overwhelming Alexis's army is and finally accepts defeat. News of his downfall soon reaches Marine, but she doesn't even care. She asks who led the Union forces and is left speechless when she hears that it was Alexis himself, commanding his army with incredible skill. Marine can't believe he actually joined the battle and orders her allies not to underestimate him just because he doesn't look like a fighter. She runs to her room, throws herself onto her bed, and wonders why Alexis had to step onto the battlefield. She's worried and doesn't want him to get dragged into the brutal war that's about to unfold. Soon after, Alexis leads Marine's forces into battle against the Vikings, who are part of the Alliance. He brings along his massive, slow-moving ironclad ships, and as soon as he spots the enemy, he orders his men to halt and form a circular formation. The Viking king commands his warriors to charge at Alexis at full speed. He notices the strange formation and decides to surround the enemy fleet and attack from all sides. He uses his crest to bless his soldiers, sending them into a berserk frenzy. Alexis orders his men to get into smaller boats and wait for the Vikings to come closer. The moment the Vikings start spreading out, Alexis gives the command to advance and grants protection to his troops. The soldiers in the small boats start firing arrows at the raging Vikings and don't stop even as arrows rain back on them. Then Alexis commands his massive warship to launch its assault. As his attacks sink enemy ships, some Vikings manage to get close and try to board. But Alexis's soldiers stab them and send them back into the sea, and the battle rages on like that. By nightfall, the Vikings have lost half their fleet, while Alexis hasn't suffered a single loss. The Viking king is furious at the thought of being defeated, and even though his generals beg him to retreat, he declares that he'll fight like a true man and die on the battlefield. He unleashes all the power of his crest, entering a beast mode along with the rest of his soldier. He charges straight toward Alexis, boards one of his ships, and slaughters every soldier on it. Ordinary men are no match for him and his raging Vikings, and soon the king makes his way to the main ship to face Alexis himself. Archers surround him and fire from every direction, but he keeps advancing, ignoring all the pain and damage as he cuts down anyone in his path. Then, they manage to hit him with a massive harpoon, dealing a critical blow, but even that isn't enough to completely bring him down. He rips the harpoon out of his chest and keeps walking toward his enemy. Now, every soldier is too terrified to attack, and Alexis starts to cry as he watches the man's pitiful, blood-soaked state. The soldiers surround Alexis and strike the Viking king again, but he simply swats them aside. The mage beside Alexis finally steps in and throws poison daggers at the Viking, paralyzing him. Taking advantage of the moment, one soldier beheads the king, but even headless, he keeps walking forward for a few steps before collapsing at last. The blood gushing from his body floods the deck, and Alexis's knees go weak at the horrific sight. His mages rush to support him as the king's crest shatters, releasing chaotic energy that begins to gather in the air. Alexis steps forward and absorbs all of it into himself. Soon after, Seleuca visits Marine to tell her that with the Viking king's defeat, the three great powers, the Alliance, the Union, and the Treaty, are now standing on equal ground. Seleuca wants to broker a truce between the Alliance and the Union, but Marine refuses her offer. She insists that the Alliance is still stronger and says she's ready to face everyone in her own way. Seleuca accepts her decision, but warns her that fighting among themselves isn't wise. That's exactly what the real enemy wants. Marine asks what she means, and Seleuca tells her that the Mage Academy is probably the true root of all evil. She doesn't have solid proof, but she believes they were the ones who summoned the demon during the tragedy of the Great Wedding. Marine says they'll uncover the truth once the battle is over. As Seleuca starts to leave, Marine asks what they told Alexis to make him join the war. Seleuca replies that Alexis wants to stop her from walking down a violent path because, in the end, it'll only destroy her. Marine gets angry when she hears that and declares that she won't stop after sacrificing so much already. Seleuca calmly answers that both Theo and Alexis are ready to stop her, but also ready to forgive her and form a future alliance. However, Marine doesn't want peace. She orders everyone to unite for an all-out war against both the Treaty and the Union. When Seleuca leaves, Marine begins trembling with fear, already dreading the terrible war that's about to begin. Even so, she's determined to see it through to the very end.